Hi, everybody. It's David Fleming here from the Toronto Realty Group, and welcome to part two of our question and answer with economist Ben Rabidoux. Now, on Monday, we answered, I think, probably about 6 or 7 questions, really good questions from the readers, even better answers from Ben. I think we have 9 or 10 questions for part two today. So without further ado, let's get right back to me and Ben. Okay, so Karis, another name we see here regularly, says, will not hold you to this, so that's good. When do you predict the first rate cut? Also would appreciate any color as to when or why that's going to happen. And just to throw in, Catherine wrote a comment responding to this. She said, is the reason we're not seeing more stress in the market due to the fact that buyers locked into 5 or 10 year fixed rates? Prices haven't fallen much and not many recent purchase resales from what I see on House Sigma. I just don't get it. Why are prices so high? Catherine's clearly a frustrated buyer. So color on when is the cut going to happen? Why would that happen? And then to Catherine, why aren't we seeing more downward pressure on prices?
Yeah, okay. All right. Let me I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay, because this sometimes could just make it easier. Okay. So the first question was around rate cuts. When do we think we're going to see them? I think probably towards the end of the first half of next year is I think when we'll start to see it. Now that changes if we start to see real material weakness in the economy. Okay, so if job losses start to accelerate, you can pull some of those projections forward. If the economy is a little more resilient. So interestingly, the Bank of Canada came out in the monetary policy report just this week, and they basically pushed back their projections for when the inflation rate is going to get back to 2%. So originally they said kind of towards the end of next year, and then they came out and said, well, actually, we think it might not be till mid 2025, which is their way of saying we think we need to keep rates higher for longer. Okay. If the economy weakens, it'll absolutely accelerate the slowdown in inflation, and it'll pull forward some of those rate cuts. But all else equal, if the economy cools, as the Bank of Canada suggests, towards the end of the first half next year, we'll see rate cuts. I think that by the end of next year, we'll probably see the overnight rate. We're right now we're at 5% on the policy rate. I think you could easily see it down to 3.5%, but I don't think we're going to get a whole lot below 3%. Unless we get into a really nasty recession, and the Bank of Canada is kind of hinting at that it's going to happen, which would then mean that you're going to consistently see mortgages in that kind of 4+% range.
Yeah.
As to why nothing's mattering yet, so we kind of talked about the excess savings that were built up and some of those other kind of structural issues why people are sort of protected. This is an interesting way to look at it. So this is what you're looking at on the left is the household debt service ratio. You can see this, David?
Yeah.
Okay. This is so again. We talked about the price to income ratio and why that doesn't really matter. What matters a lot more is debt servicing. Debt service ratio is moving up. It's not too far off kind of the 30-year highs, but it's not as high as you would expect given how high rates have moved. And so what's going on? So if you look at this chart here, what you're looking at is this ratio, but pulled apart into the interest and the principal component. Mm-hmm. And so you can see that interest payments are surging. But look at what's happening with principal repayments. So if we back up, this drop right here, this was from during COVID when we had all the mortgage deferrals, right? And you remember, just as an aside, remember everyone was like freaked out about the deferral cliff, right?
Yeah.
And I was probably the first one to quantify that and do the work on it. Be like, actually, there is no such thing as a deferral cliff. It's a non-issue. And you can go back and find me writing about that on Twitter. So again, getting back to people that say, well, you're just a housing bear. I'm not actually. There's been times where I push back against some of these bearish narratives. But you can see that's what principal repayment looked like when we had mortgage deferrals. Principal repayment is falling at a faster rate now than during that deferral period. Now, why is that? That's because of exactly this dynamic, which was the static payment variable. You go back to 2021 and early 2022, half of the mortgages being originated were variable. 80% of those had static payments. And so the concept of the static payment variable rate mortgage is you extend the amortization out to infinity in some cases to keep the payment constant. And so you're seeing, for example, you got a fifth of CIBC's book is now negative amortizing. The feds are targeting this. The bank regulator is going to force banks to hold more capital against that, which basically means that this practice will just go away. They're going to force people to start amortizing. So look, it's just it's overall it gets back to the point where it just we have structural dynamics in the structure of the mortgage market that has kind of softened the blow, but it's not a permanent thing. These issues are coming. And that debt service ratio, by the way, if you roll it forward and you look at the renewals that are coming, if rates hold anywhere near these levels, we're going to be at all-time highs later this year. And we're going to blow like monster all-time highs in 2024. And that data set correlates pretty cleanly with things like non-performing loans at Canadian banks. And so, getting back to that whole concept of why are arrears so low, the answer is it just takes a little bit of time. It takes longer than people think, but it's coming.
Yeah, and as far as the, I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say, in that period when principal was here and interest was here, I remember talking to investors. And so, the whole concept of what makes a good investment in real estate, I mean, look, let's be honest, people are counting on long-term appreciation. But back then, if you were carrying a unit and it was like, oh, it's $100 a month negative, and I'd say, okay, well, that's not the best way to run an investment. But of your $2,500 mortgage payment, it was like 1,700 was principal and 800 was interest. And you'd be like, so you're just taking your money and moving it from this pocket to this pocket. So why not? Now it's the complete opposite. And I look at the quote unquote investment properties, and I don't want to talk myself out of a sale here, but man, it is really tough with the way that principal and interest portions of a mortgage payment have swapped. It's really tough to kind of justify that.
Can you see this?
Yeah, it's perfect.
What are you seeing? I can't tell what you're seeing. Can you see all the other crap in the background, or are you just seeing this one chart?
No, I'm seeing, well, I can see your Apple up top, but that's fine.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, for some reason I can't see what you're seeing. Okay, so to your point, so this is again just a simple measure. We take the house price index for condos in the city of Toronto, assume that you buy it at 80% loan to value at average mortgage rates, and achieve average rents for the city of Toronto. It's not a perfect measure, but it gives you a sense of what's happening over time. So to your point, so headline cash flow, it went negative kind of 2018, 2019, but you're absolutely right. When you adjust and you add back principal repayment, you were still considerably positive. Now today, even when you add back the principal repayment, like it's deeply negative. This actually gets to a broader question that I have, is just like who the marginal buyer is going to be in the condo market if these trends continue. Because look, the rental market's a disaster. We know that. It sucks. But the economics of renting over owning a comparable unit, it's hard to justify at this point with these rates where they are. And that also gets to, I think there was a question that somebody asked about, what's going to happen with all these condos that are in construction and completions. I do worry about some of these completions as they come up. And this is something you've documented. You're probably the first to really ring the bell on this, is that some of these pre-construction condos were sold at a significant premium to resale. And now we're getting to the point where it sounds like there's a significant volume of unrealized losses in those pipelines. And those buyers are going to be facing like a substantial capital call at completion. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but it's hard to. So I would like bucket the market into single family and condo, because I do think you're going to see a different trajectory over the next couple of years. And I don't know what it's going to look like, but I think that you could certainly make the argument that it's going to be a bit of a rough stretch as these units complete. And we are going to see big completions this year and next.
Yeah. Okay, hang on to that, because somebody asked a question at the end about completions. Here's a fun one for you. So Chris, and I don't know if this is Chris Kansick who works with me. It's probably not. Or if this was Chris, who was around the blog for a long time. He said, if David ran for the mayor of Toronto, would you have voted for him over Olivia Chow? What do you think is his biggest strength and greatest weakness as mayor? You don't have to answer that, but I have to read it.
The best hair of any mayor, for sure. Never ages. Just dead sexy. Be the sexiest mayor in Canada. I mean,
work for John Tory, right?
Oh well, as we found out, the ladies do love him.
Moving on. Okay, so blog reader RTM, apologize, I don't know how to pronounce that, although this guy's kind of a shit. He says, you'll love this because he takes a swing at Appraiser. He says, why is the interest rate still climbing when Liberal Party members like Appraiser and Ace, who's Ace Goodhart? Appraiser and Ace Goodhart are two of my favorite blog readers. They squawk that inflation's actually at 0% and Trudeau's done an amazing job. So let me read you what Ace said. I love Ace. He said, neither of us work for the Bank of Canada. TIFF had a tougher set I think that means of, you know what, than I thought he did. Trudeau cannot fire the head of Bank of Canada, even though Pierre thinks he can, because studying civics is not required to be prime minister or to be a conspiracy theorist, though you, man, really need your trucker convoy. No echo chamber for your here. Whew, this is getting nasty.
Wow.
And then he said, just to annoy him, I'm warming up to Olivia. Imagine a mayor who actually understands how civics works. This is true. Someone said this to me on the weekend. Anyway, so that's just two guys going back and forth. Gents,
I don't even know what there's too much. I don't even, what is the question?
no, we can skip it. He's just stirring the pot. He's just saying why are interest rates still climbing when we're talking about inflation? He's just being a shit. I do appreciate the question though. Sometimes you need guys like that to ruffle some feathers. Okay, so M, these questions are getting real long. Okay, so M says, how would you rank these answers? With the rapid rise in interest rates, the housing market hasn't fallen because A, financial institution accommodation for variable rate mortgage holders. B, population growth. C, owners and buyers are sufficiently capitalized. Good question. I feel like
They want the right. Well, I mean, it's obvious it's all of those in terms of like the order of importance. I think it's probably C, that they're well capitalized. Bank Canada had a great chart on this, just showing kind of like liquidity buffer. So how many months of liquid savings do you have? And Canadians still have a lot of liquid savings. Now it scales based on income, right? So the lowest income cohorts have a lot less. But there's still a lot of excess savings out there. I think that absolutely has moved the needle. And then the second one, which I forget what she said. Oh, population growth, huge. And by the way, everyone says, well, if they're all renters, like what? Well, why does that matter? Well, absolutely, it matters, because if you make a chaotic rental market, you incentivize people to get out of it into the ownership pool if they can, right? So that's one thing. You force people out of the rental market. But then secondly, if you're going to bring in 700,000 non-permanent residents and a whole ton of international students, well, now you incentivize some of these less scrupulous investors who might say, well, okay, I'll buy this single family home and I'll just make the numbers work by jamming 15 students in there, right? And we're absolutely seeing that. So you do incentivize demand for resale by ramming up population growth of overwhelmingly of renters, right? So that's the other one. The first one, I think, was just kind of the structure of the mortgages. That has mattered less than the other two. And then I also just think resale supply is still very low, right? Even like we're a year and a half into a tightening cycle, and there's still almost nothing to buy. It's remarkable, right? So I think that's going to start to change, but it is what it is. Those are absolutely the dynamics at play.
So I think M nailed it there with owners and buyers sufficiently capitalized. I mean, I can tell you, when the pandemic started, I sat down and I looked at my finances and I said, if I don't make another dollar, how many months can I stay afloat for? And I put down the number of months. And then I called my brother in London. We had the same conversation. And I talked to some of my friends. And not to say that we weren't ever going to make a dollar again, but when the pandemic started, it was a bit of a scary time. So for me, I started thinking about, M here is talking about how sufficiently capitalized you are. It's not to say that we're never going to make another dollar again, but it is to say, what kind of savings do you have? What kind of safety net do you have? So M asks a second question here and says, kind of the same as what we've been talking about, but if stress begins to appear in the housing market, do you think the federal government will sit idle and allow market forces to dictate prices? If not, what regulation changes do you think are the most to be enacted?
Well, I mean, I think they're doing a lot right now to stimulate housing. So they're already kind of, full metal, like pedal to the metal here. So I'd kind of push back on the notion that they're not doing anything already to stimulate. Arguably, you could say that maybe the regulators will take a kind of counter-cyclical view and they will ease policies to kind of soften the blow. But at this point, it looks like they're doing the opposite. Like OSFI is trying to tighten even after the horses are out of the barn. Like this actually makes no sense to me. Like I was very much in favor of the original iteration of B20. I think with a bit of hindsight, we can all recognize that, that stress test was a pretty damn good idea.
I'll admit it.
But like, why now? Like, why are we then further tightening B20 when we just had the lowest growth in mortgage debt in Q1 in 30 years? So like, what are we 20 years? So like, what are we pushing for here? But so all the evidence is the contrary, that they're not going to do that. And I don't know that the feds can continue to be as stimulative as they have been, because I actually think they risk kind of I don't know, like an anti-immigration backlash. Like I feel like some of the policies now are bordering on irresponsible and are going to fuel some rhetoric against immigration that's going to be counterproductive. I worry about that. right? Because
Yeah.
it's just, I mean, what they're doing is crazy.
Yeah. I agree. Question that's not quite related to it, but we did talk about this earlier. So Hades, I'm pretty sure, I don't remember grade 10 classics. Hades is the Greek god of the underworld. I don't know if the name of this was a joke. Says, Ben, how are mortgage defaults so low, and how hard will the federal government push to stop them from happening? Similar to what M asked. And then also, I thought we had maximum 30-year amortizations. Why am I hearing about 90 years in the media? So two questions there.
Okay, so I think the first one we've addressed at length, so I'm gonna punt on that one. The second one, why about the amortization lengths? So
Yeah.
at origination, stupid dog. So at origination, you can go out to 35 years still on a kind of non-federally regulated lender. Now, what they're referring to is the static payment variables, and the mechanism is you extend the amortization to keep the payments constant.
Yeah.
You can only do that during the term. Okay, so when these come up for renewal, they reset back to their original amortization, which is actually a nasty little time bomb that's waiting, and it actually makes it softens the blow over the near term. It actually compounds the pain over the longer term. Something to keep in mind. But that said, something that people don't realize is Canadian banks have a lot of leeway, and insurers, by the way, have a lot of leeway in helping to kind of soften the blow for consumers. So if you were to walk into a bank tomorrow and say, I don't think I can make my next mortgage payment, right off the bat, they can extend amortization to 40 years. There's all sorts of mechanisms that they can do to try to help soften the blow. And that's sort of like, that's an understood policy that's been there for years. It's not new. It's just not widely advertised. So, at origination, it's capped. Beyond that, it gets it's a little more convoluted.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that's fair point. I think, I've when I got into the business, you had 40-year amortizations. Then in '08, they scaled it back to 35 to 30. Then there's restrictions on when you can go above 25. So it felt like all the changes that happened in '08 after the financial crisis in the States, that we made a very safe banking system. But the concept now of moving towards these longer amortization periods, I think for every alarmist out there, that's going to sound the bell, right?
Yeah.
Now,
Moving to longer amortization. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's going to sound a bell. This will naturally resort, like it'll resolve itself in time, right? These 90-year amortizations, that they don't stay as 90 years. At renewal, they get reset, right?
they get reset at renewal. So it's not like, okay,
Yeah.
so it's not like you can actually, like in Europe, you have a 100-year amortization. It's
Yeah,
like,
that doesn't exist in Canada, right?
yeah.
You can amortize them out infinitely for 5 years if rates rise a lot, but then at renewal, it's got to reset. And that's going to be painful for people.
Okay, so friend of ours from Vancouver, another regular reader, Vancouver Keith says, are we headed for a market freeze up where people pretty much stop putting their homes on the market because no one can afford to move up? Seniors choose to age in place in record numbers. Could we see sales volume plummet and prices stick sideways? So we've covered inventory, but the concept of people stuck.
Yeah, so we kind of talked about that because we said there are some owners who are sitting on 2.5% mortgages where even if they wanted to downsize, they're not going to do that and take on a 6% mortgage to do it, right?
Yeah.
So the market's effectively frozen for those buyers. So that'll thaw in time. Over the longer term, is there a structural issue around aging in place? Possibly. I think it's a little too early to tell, but it's certainly plausible. And I do think that in the city of Toronto, where you have like the double land transfer tax, you look at the economics of downsizing versus staying and kind of making your house more age friendly. It's like the first, whatever, 30, 40, 50,000, depending on the price of your home. It's kind of like found money, right? So you're almost incentivized to stay in place. So it's one of those like unintended consequences of tax policy that you create a bit of a freezing in the market.
Yeah. So here's a good question for you. This is not a trap. Should senior citizens be forced to sell their homes if they're too big?
No, I don't know how you ever would police that. No.
Now,
what I would say though, here's an interesting one though.
Yeah.
I would say, okay, here's one to try on for size. What about to the extent that we have some underused housing in Canada? Okay, so let's say it's being held by a non-resident. Okay,
Yeah.
let me throw this at you. So I actually have the view, and this is an unpopular view, and you're going to hate this, but property taxes in Canada are actually very low international, especially among like big developed, and especially you get a place like Vancouver, it's absurdly low. That incentivizes people to hold units empty. Now we can argue about how big a problem that is, but to some extent it is a problem when in a supply constrained market. So I mean, I would be all in favor of looking at some creative solutions where it's like we just impose a national property tax on every
Mhm.
home that's then fully deductible against earned income locally or pension income. So you're not penalizing seniors. But what it does is it raises the carrying costs for someone who doesn't live here, right?
Right.
And I do wonder if solutions like that make some sense.
I mean, the reason I brought it up is because cynically, I wrote a blog post a couple weeks ago. I was really angry. I haven't put it up yet. It's basically about,
I'm listening. I just gotta let my dog out. Keep
yeah.
going.
So I'll talk to you guys. So it's basically about this concept of forcing seniors from their homes. And so what I didn't like was a few of the quotes from economists that talk about underused housing. So here we go. So an old lady, and we'll call her Ethel, just because that's an old person name. Ethel lives in a 4-bedroom house. She's owned it for 40 years. People will say no one is sleeping in the other 3 bedrooms. Ethel's house is underused and that it's somehow unfair. One of her rooms is a TV room, one is a sewing room, and one is a room for her grandkids. Who in the hell, I'm sorry, I don't want to sound like an American here, talk about our rights and freedoms. Who in the hell is going to tell Ethel what she should do with her house? But I think there's some of the population out there that's saying it's unfair for Ethel to have a 4-bedroom house if she's one old lady and living in it and not using those bedrooms. So I think this war is brewing, and some of the blog readers have taken me to task for creating this straw man argument. I think this concept of underutilized houses for seniors is going to pick up as we move forward in the next few
No,
years.
I think it's an interesting conundrum, and I don't know what the answer is, but it's weird because we do have a relatively low housing stock relative to international standards. So we have very few homes per capita, but we have a ton of rooms per capita.
Yeah.
So think about that. So we have a lot of very large houses that
Yeah.
are arguably being underused. I don't know what the solution is to that, but it is a weird policy conundrum.
Yeah. Okay, so you got a super fan here. JL says, regular reader your post, appreciate your insights. I'm going to read this. Like he's just gushing to you right now. He asked a question and then answered it. But he says, given the economic path we're on, do you think there's a breaking point when something has to give, i.e., fundamentals improve or real estate prices plateau or fail? Then his answer, which I think he wants some color on, is to me, it seems like every lever to keep the party going has already been pulled. Prices are already high and detached from income, where even the 90th percentile double income earners, in many cases, are no longer sufficient. Down payment gifts, parental support routinely tapped, debt levels maxed, general income levels not rising, cost of living standards squeeze. Immigration might taper off if economic immigrants won't find the proposition sufficiently attractive anymore. I mean, this is doomsday, right? Would
Yeah.
appreciate your thoughts as to whether you agree this is the long-term unsustainable. We can't go on. I'm sort of skimming here without something breaking
Yeah, okay,
specific.
I get the gist of the question. I mean, the short answer is there's no end to the stupidity that can come out of Ottawa. Like, I mean, come on, give me a break. Like, what's stopping them from mailing everybody a $10,000 check? Like, what's stopping them from doing universal basic income? The idea that we've exhausted every terrible policy is absurd. Trust me, this government can do all sorts of stupid shit. Now, that said, the affordability constraints are very real. I don't know how you work around the deterioration of affordability that we've seen without it venting through lower sales, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not a real answer, but I would say that like the trajectory in the near term is probably this market's got to soften. Longer term, we've talked about the structural supply demand issues. They look very supportive for housing. Government policy is the wild card, but like if this government stays in power, like they've clearly shown that they're happy to stimulate even at the expense of things like inflation, right? And they're just full of stupid ideas. So, I mean, who knows the end of the stupidity?
So does it bother you? This is my question. Does it bother you? So I hate all politicians, right? But when you have the federal government or Mr. Handsome stand up and talk about the people and affordability and families, and it's all bullshit because everything they're doing is just making it more expensive. Like as an economist, like does that not set you off?
Well, it's self-defeating, right? A lot of it is self-defeating. It's not addressing the fundamental issues. It's like, we talk a lot about, okay, would it make more sense to loosen amortization rules or something like that? And it's like, yeah, okay, fine. You could make that argument. It's a perfectly reasonable argument to make. We've had, 30-year amortizations or more in many parts of the world for the longest time, and it's fine.
Yeah.
But does that fundamentally solve the affordability? It's like, no, it's a temporary thing. And then prices revert to the level where that change gets absorbed, right? And that's very much kind of what they're doing right now. It's like, well, we'll solve the inflation problem by mailing everyone checks. I mean, like the stupidest idea. Like you just can't beat inflation by mailing people money. So it's stuff
Yeah.
like that. It's just like I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It's just the thinking in Ottawa these days is just, it leaves a little bit to be desired. But I don't want to delve too much into politics. It is what it is. It's just I don't get what they're thinking.
I got a check for, it was like climate change initiative. I got a check for like $80. I was like, what is this? The stamp to mail this, the envelope, the people to process it, the people to like, how much did this cost to mail me a check? I'm not doing anything for the environment, I'm going to admit. Actually, that's not true. We had people over on the weekend, and instead of getting paper plates or plastic, I rented plates, although maybe the gas to carry the plates. Long story short, okay, I'm no environmentalist. Why I'm getting a check for $70? The grocery checks, man. Are you kidding me? You're mailing people checks for gross, like, I get it. We're trying to help, but this is not going to help people. This is not going to curb inflation. Okay, so you don't want to talk politics. I get it. Okay, let's move on to a fun one. Jason asks, the government debt in the U.S. is $32 trillion. That's 97,000 per person. The government debt in Canada is 1.2 billion. That's 30K per person. Does any of this matter anymore? The U.S. is never going to pay off that debt. It'll be a quadrillion dollars by the time my kids are adults. Canada used to talk about paying off debt. Does it matter? Should we actually try to achieve this?
Man, that's a loaded question. So I don't have a great answer. What I would say is, I get exactly what they're saying. Okay, we have an issue with debt levels at the sovereign level globally, and especially in the big developed countries. And what I think is interesting. So if you go back to late last year, the federal government, you'll find this interesting, David, they quietly canceled the real return bond program. Okay. So that was a program where, you're familiar with the concept of the bond. You lend the government money, they repay you, they give you your interest over X number of years, and they repay you the principal. But that's nominal, right? So they'll pay you 5% a year, 5% a year, whatever it is. Okay. Real return bonds would say, we'll pay you whatever inflation is plus 2%. And then at the end, instead of just giving you back your principal, we'll give you your principal plus the accumulated inflation. Okay, so now it protects the lender from inflation. Okay, that's a real return bond. Now ask yourself, why would the federal government cancel a program that protects people from inflation? And I wonder if there's discussions in Ottawa to the effect of the question here, which is basically that there's no easy way out of this debt dilemma except to allow inflation to run a little bit higher and inflate away the value of this debt. And I think we're starting to see some signs that governments around the world are acknowledging that is going to have to be part of the solution to all this. So there is a scenario, and I'm trying to game this out and figure out what it means broadly, but I could absolutely see a scenario where inflation in Canada gets back around, call it 3%. And the Bank of Canada has a target of 1 to 3%, but they're a mandate of 1 to 3%, but a target at 2. Okay, so they want to get it back to 2. But I could see a scenario where they get core inflation back to 3%, and it kind of gets sticky there, and they're like, good enough.
Yeah.
We'll let it run at 3 for a while, right? Yeah. And they'll just let inflation run a little bit hotter. That has the effect of stimulating the economy, and consequently, as the economy grows, the debt burden will fall. Okay, and it is one of the kind of tried and true ways that think about it, like historically, that's how governments get out from these crushing debt burdens is they inflate them away. They never pay them back. Right? So I can see that scenario.
Yeah. In the States, 32 trillion. I mean, like, you're not going to pay that off, but they don't seem interested in paying that off, right?
No, they're not going to pay that off. And that's not even getting into unfunded liabilities. In Canada, at least, we don't have the massive unfunded liability issue. But what we do have is provincial debt that's very large because our provinces bear the burden for education and healthcare, which is not the case in the States. So anytime you see people that compare headline national debt to GDP, it's always misleading because, of course, the U.S., their debt would look great if they could offload education and healthcare to the States, right? So you got to add that back in. When you do, we're extremely indebted too. I don't know the easy answer to any of that, but inflation will probably be a part of the answer. And then, you can easily make the argument, well, isn't that bullish for real estate? Like maybe that could be over the longer term.
So Ben's saying it's a great time to buy. Okay, last question here. We've done a lot, and I thank you for all this. So this is, I knew this question was coming. Ben, do you have data for housing starts and housing completions? How are we prepared or not for the coming immigration boom, which we've covered? Has the increase in rates halted construction? So I'm scared shitless of housing starts. I know some developers, guys, I work on land assemblies on the side. Developers are dropping sites like crazy. No one wants to close. What is happening with housing starts? Because I think 5 years from now, I don't know what I just don't think we're gonna have inventory. You tell me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong
So,
here.
well, it looks that way right now. Yeah, that's kind of the direction we're going. So we just had the steepest monthly decline in housing starts since 2008 last month, just to give you perspective. I already showed you the chart on building permits. Building permits tend to lead housing starts by a few months, right? And they're tanking, right? That's specific to single family, but you roll it forward. The multifamily, it hits with a bit of a lag because if you pre-sold a condo, you've got those deposits. You're probably you may push ahead with the building anyways, and so it takes a little while longer for that to filter through to multi-segment, but it's coming. So yeah, that's trending down. Completions were high last year-ish, but and they're going to be high again, particularly in the multifamily this year and next. So we will see a lot. Like it's a weird thing where it's like all the trends. It's like in the near term, everything looks challenging, right? That's the only way to describe it. The next, I don't know, year, 2 years looks very challenging. But you roll these trends forward, it flips completely, and it's like then we get serious supply issues. So like I could really see a scenario where the next period of time, year and a half, 2 years, whatever it looks like, is a challenge for real estate. And then it very quickly flips, like we saw in kind of 2017 coming out of that downturn. And it's just like, where's all the supply, right? And that could be the story over the longer term, because none of the trends look good, right? Falling housing starts, super recessionary signal, right? It's a weird thing where it's like, if housing starts fall, it weighs a lot on the economy in the near term. But it sets up for supply shortage in the long term. So it's like, good in the short term, bad in the long term sort of thing, depending on your perspective.
We're not going to get this 1.5 million houses in Ontario in 10 years that Doug Ford and everybody else is parroting. Like it's never going to happen.
I don't know how it's I can't see it. It's certainly not moving in that direction right now. Best was the housing minister kind of trying to dunk on Poilievre and get absolutely ratioed on Twitter, because he was like, now is the time for real action and not rhetoric around housing, and look at what we're doing, and he's talking about all these things that they've accomplished as permits are plunging, right? Like it's a strange time.
He also owns 4 investment properties, I believe, right?
Yeah, they all do. Well, they don't all, but like it's like a third of the MPs own investment properties. I mean,
I read a story about who was it, Hussein Ahmed, that owns. It's like he's the housing minister, but he's hoarding houses, right? So
yeah,
that's politics for you. So
yeah, it's
that's
not
it.
good. It's not a good look. It's not a good look. It's a really bad optics for sure.
No, but I've learned that is politics, right? Unfortunately, and so I'm a cynic, and a lot of my views are cynical. A lot of the readers have grown to not like it. I think I might have lost some people with some of the Friday rants, but I honestly, as I get older, I get more cynical, and I think I just get more realistic. I understand things better. I'm less optimistic, but like whether it's politics or planning or just governance or whatever it is, like you look at the questions these guys have asked today and the answers and the charts you've shown, like I joke about this becoming Gotham City, but like we're not building, there's too many people, there's nowhere to live, it's too expensive, but everyone deserves and ought to live here and affordable. And I always blame the government for saying like the word should, like everyone should be able to afford. Like you tell people you should be able to afford to live here. They don't say that in London. They don't say that in Paris. They don't say that in Tokyo. They don't say that in Manhattan. So I think that's kind of
Yeah, the difference. Okay, so here's what's tricky about all that, and this is the part that I struggle with, is like all of those major cities. So let's take New York as an example. So you can go from Manhattan, and you can drive an hour and a half, and you can find properties that are like single family, 350 to 450 US for nice properties. That does not exist in Canada, and that's what I struggle with. Like you drive an hour and a half out of Toronto, you're still like 8, 9, a million for single family. Like that's what I don't get is how you can have this vibrant like second tier city dynamic in the US and we can't have that in Canada. I don't see a reason for that.
I think it's density. I think like you can drive from Manhattan, like you can get out to Connecticut or and my geography might be off here, but like you've got the bridge and tunnel crowd in New Jersey. You've got a great train system across the Eastern Seaboard. I have clients that say that they live 2 states away. They take a train that's an hour and a half through a state to another state to get to work. So, I mean, we don't have that here. We have the Golden Horseshoe, but we don't have, and I've always said, if you had a bullet train that you'd find in Japan, right? If you could get from Niagara Falls to Union Station in 26 minutes, the entire course of real estate in the Golden Horseshoe would change, and we'd have real affordability because you can buy off of Lundy's Lane for 400 grand, have a nice little bungalow, and you could work downtown, right? Just off of Union Station. Instead, I don't know how long it takes to get in there, but
no, that's an interesting point. I've said that for a while too. Like I can't believe how poor the transportation infrastructure is in Canada, right? Like high speed rail would be an absolute game changer, and it's stunning to me that we want to throw all these dollars everywhere else except at things that'll actually move the needle here in Canada.
or tear down the Gardner, and people are like, oh, it'll only change the commute like a minute. Like, anyways, topic for another day. So thanks so much for doing this, guys. Or guys, I was going to say guys, for the readers. The readers, thanks so much for your questions. For Ben, thank you. It's been 3 years since we did this. I could probably keep going for hours, but you probably got to go fishing, I would imagine, or
not fishing today, unfortunately, but I do have to hop. But it's been good chatting, man. Thanks for having me on.
Go for it. Okay, we'll end it there, guys. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.